So welcome today. I'm Dan Rabin. Thank you for joining the Branford Forum. It's a special pleasure to have Jesus Amadeo with us today. He's Senior Vice President at MDRC, which is a research company, and he's going to talk about the MDRC's methods and some results. And the topic of his discussion is, do social programs work? Jesus?
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you for the introduction. Welcome, everyone. I am Jesus. And what I would like to do today in a presentation is to frame the question, what are social programs? What is the challenge for social programs in the United States? And ask you to join me in a thought experiment about how would you think about social programs. And after that, I will show you two examples of how social programs have worked in the past. I'm going to share a screen and I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation, but I will not be reading any PowerPoint slides, so don't get scared. But there will be some things that in the PowerPoint slides that may be of interest. So I will start the sharing now. What are social programs? And the reason I'm putting these questions is I think we all have an understanding what a social program is. But at its most basic, it's a program that is designed to meet the basic needs of a human being. In the United States, that usually refers to socioeconomic health conditions. So it's talking about what are basic housing, what is basic health, subsistence, nutrition, food, childcare. And these are primarily delivered by the federal government. The social programs in the United States started in the 19th century, primarily after the Civil War, initially for Union soldiers and their families. After that, there was this, and that program consisted of cash, support, housing. The next quote-unquote social program was after World War I, and that was for World War I veterans, and that included primarily healthcare benefits, and particularly as a result of the high number of people who were hurt during the war. And it wasn't until after the New Deal and following the New Deal, the war on poverty, the 1960s, 1964, 65, that the program started in earnest of what we now call social programs. And those are programs that are related to welfare, public assistance, nutrition assistance, food stamps. But there are programs that are federal in nature, but they include state and local mandates, state and local financing. So for example, TANF, which is assistance for families in need. The federal government makes block grants, but the states use a state money to supplement those block grants. How these are distributed and what are the program conditions for distributions are decided by the state. I'm going to speak a little bit about MDRC. MDRC was founded by the Ford Foundation and 6 federal agencies. It was created because the new legislation, the legislation on the war on poverty, the Manpower Act, and others for the first time included funding for evaluation. And the question that had never been asked before are, do these programs actually work? Nobody knew the answer. And MDRC was created as a vehicle to carry out an evaluation. At that time, 6 federal agencies were involved in the programs, and MDRC, with the funding of 4 foundations and the federal government, was created as I imagine it to be a sole one-time project evaluation. But it did not become a one-time project evaluation. It became a going concern after that. And that dispenses with the 2 slides that I really wanted or had to talk about to start to frame the question about social programs and why we need them. This slide is titled, "What is the extent of the challenge?" And in front of you, if you are not familiar with what is in front of you, it's a population pyramid. On the left-hand side in the blue is the male population by age cohorts. By a cohort, for example, it will show how many millions of males are in ages 0 to 4, 5 to 9, and so on, until it goes to 100 plus. On the right-hand side, or in red, is the female population. What is important about this pyramid, one thing that is important is it does not look like a pyramid. It looks like a top of an ice cream cone that has been eaten at some parts. And that is important because if it looked like a traditional pyramid, it would mean that we would have a higher population than the population that is aging. Yeah, on the right-hand side, I have put the number of 331 million as the population of the United States. That is an estimate. The mid-year 2021 estimate by July, it's about 335 million. The United States is the third most populous country in the world after the People's Republic of China and India. But there are going to be about 56 million people right now that are over age 65. And if you look carefully, and I'm going to put the mouse, if you see the mouse moving around, the age 55 to 59, which is the end of the baby boomers, still large enough, which means there are more people in employment, not necessarily in 2020, 2021, that are able to earn more and contribute towards Social Security in order to support the aging population. But if we look to the cohort of 50, 54, up to down to 40, 49, that's smaller than the additional, and there's a larger one now in the age 25 to 29. We have about 104 million people that are younger than age 25. So a question there, if you look at the 125 million, 104 million people, do we have enough employment for that number of people that are coming up? Do we have enough facilities and ability to educate that number of people? Do we have enough healthcare? Do we have a system that will provide for those who are living in poverty conditions to be able to eventually accumulate enough assets to be able to retire, like a Social Security, like a safety net? What programs do we have in place that can assist someone temporarily who loses a job? Or during the pandemic, we have many of the millions of people who have lost their jobs. Is there something we can do in between losing a job and getting another one to support them through unemployment benefits? Programs that can allow somebody to find employment. So these are questions that are challenges for our national policies. And if you look at how that pyramid will move through the time, you can almost start to anticipate what will be the challenges for national policy in 20, 30 years of time. Now, this population does not take into account immigration because it counts or estimates the amount of population currently in the United States. If we wanted to this pyramid to look like a pyramid, then you could say we can change that through immigration policy and have more people. Do we have enough people for all our service economy to be able to service all the economic necessities we're going to have? We will have enough employees, or will there be a shift from labor to capital, to investment more into automation, into robotics, into artificial intelligence, to take over some jobs that traditionally have been done by people? And how will that balance out? These are questions of national importance, and if we're not addressing them now, we will have to address them in an urgent manner a few years down the line. Now, the left-hand side, I'm using the mouse, is an estimate of 35 million people, and those are an estimate based on the census 2019. The first thing to note about that is the 35 million people is really not the situation now. This was in 2019, before the pandemic. We know that this number is understated. By how much, I do not know. It could be 50 million. But let me explain how the United States define poverty. There are two federal agencies that deal with poverty. One is the Bureau of the Census that has a poverty threshold. And the other one is the Department of Health and Human Services that has a poverty guideline. Below that number, the 2021 poverty guidelines state that if you are a single person in the continental United States, excluding Alaska, which is as higher, you would be considered to be below the poverty line if you were earning $12,880 a year. If you were two people in the household, $17,000. All the way if you were 8 individuals in a household, if you earned less than $44,660, you're considered to be below the poverty line. Now, these guidelines are important because it allows you to become eligible or have access to some of these social programs. But if you look at reality, it's very difficult to imagine that somebody can live in $12,880. MIT has developed a living wage calculator. And I have taken some figures from the living wage calculator and put them below that. And it's for New Haven County. One person, a single household with one person in New Haven County, will need $28,578 a year to be able to live and meet basic needs. And basic needs are housing, food, nutrition. If that person lives with a child and that person is a single household, just one parent and a child, the cost in New Haven County is $61,073 because it includes the cost of childcare. Compare that with the poverty guideline of $17,420. And if that person were two adults with no children, because there's no child care, the cost will be $54,109 to have a living wage. So this shows that there is a serious disconnect between what we talk about poverty guidelines and what a living wage is. So when we talk about the nature of the problem and the challenge in the United States, we're not talking about 35 million. We're talking about the additional people that earn below $28,000 in New Haven County and the $12,880 and across the country. How many people are we talking about? Well, I don't think there's a reliable estimate. 50, 60 million. I have no idea with the extent of the pandemic what that would be. We will have better information in terms of the population as the results of the 2020 census will come out. But even then, we'll still have to rely on estimates and on periodic surveys to estimate what the extent of the need is. But that's the challenge. And that is the challenge for national policy. That is the challenge that is present now and is present for the next 10, 15 years. Question for the United States, for all of us, how can we afford what we need to do? And what is it that we need to do? These are questions that we all ask. Let me expand a little bit, and again, using 2019 poverty rates, because I do not have any further information. This 2019 poverty rate was published in September 2020, and as I explained before, has no relationship to reality because in 2020, because of the pandemic, this poverty rate is much higher, but I don't know how much higher than what it shows here. It shows a poverty rate of 10.5%. So that would be about 35 million people based on the estimate for 2020 population. But if we look at by race and Hispanic origin, white, the poverty rate is 9.1%, white, not Hispanic, 7.3%, Black, 18.8%, Asian, 7.3%, Hispanic, any race, 15.7%. So the poverty rates are much higher by race and ethnic origin. By gender, male 9.4, female 11.5. But look at this particular point when it comes to age. 14.4% is the poverty rate for age under age 18. At a time when, imagine what that means below poverty rate, which is below those poverty guidelines. When children, where nutrition and a system for development of the brain, cognitive development, where nutrition is important, and that's one of the social programs that provides food and breakfast and lunch in public schools. So it is essential. So if individuals are not going to public schools, are not able to go to school, including the pandemic, and are not getting the food delivered or can pick it up, we're facing serious nutritional deficiencies in the growth. Age 18 to 64, we have a 9.4% poverty, and age 65 and older. And then I put in additional people who have disability. 22.5% of all the people in the United States with disability are at the has a poverty rate. That is a lot of that is a very large number out of the 35 million, which is an underestimate. If we make that a round number of 50 million, then we have a fifth of about 10 million people in problems. Educational attainment: no high school diploma, almost 24%. High school, no college, 12%. Some college, 8%. And a bachelor degrees or higher, 4%. So those are some characteristics. And the reason I am presenting them is to give you a sense of what the challenge is. Now, I'm going to ask you to join me in a thought experiment. And you don't have to read the PowerPoint. The thought experiment is very simple. Imagine that you are a decision maker, whether you want to imagine yourself in a federal level at the Congress, or in a local situation in a local council, but you have to make a decision about a social program. And I'm not being specific about what social program, but you're facing different points of views. Social networks will be attacking you one way or the other, no matter which way you choose. Somebody's going to disagree with you. You have a limited budget. There are priorities that are competing with that budget. You have to decide whether to increase tax revenues or not. You have to determine whether you're going to fund a social program, increase police, increase other services. And if you're in the Congress, you have to make changes between defense and non-defense spending. Whether you have assistance during the pandemic, during the financial crisis in the pandemic, the economic crisis. What information would you like to have to make a decision? And just pause for a moment. And based on everything you know, and again, you may disagree, you may think that social programs should not exist, in which case, that's a very easy decision. You don't need any information. But let's say you still have to persuade others. If you believe that social programs do not exist, you have to persuade others to join you in voting with you in order to be able that your point of view is carried out successfully. So what information would you like to have? And if you think this is an unfair question or unfair thought experiment to put you through, I would posit that this is no different than what a typical legislature is facing with all the legislative priorities. Is going to be asked the same question with as much information as you have right now, until they turn on to one of their staff and ask them, what should I think about this? How should I vote about this? What are the issues? And somebody's going to prepare a memorandum and rank the issues. But let's see if we can make you an informed consumer of what does it mean whether something works or not. I'm going to ask you a second thing. What qualities should the information have? Would you trust information? What evidence do you have that you can trust information? If I tell you right now in this presentation, oh, this social program works and that doesn't, why are you going to trust me? Why should you trust me? And what evidence am I going to give you to say that that's actually the case? How about if we decide, okay, I'm Jesus, I never met you, but I'm going to trust you for now. Well, will other people trust me? Or will they trust you who are conveying the information I gave you? Can somebody interpret what you know or what you have or what you think you know in a different way? Are you willing to spend all the goodwill, political goodwill, everything calling your chips, make a determination, go on down on the line for others to follow you? Here I put a series of questions that you may or may not have had, and I will come to how to satisfy the question, particularly trust. But some people, when I ask these questions, they want to know, well, what are the programs? What are the goals? What are they intended to do? Who are they addressing? How do they recruit people? How they participate? What are the outcomes? How does one define success? And this is very important, because if we focus on outcomes, we may actually be asking the wrong question. An outcome could be, I am a high school dropout. I joined a program with the National Guard called National Guard Challenge, which takes dropouts who are 18 years age of under, put me in a boot camp, and at the same time they teach me enough so I can pass the GED. The outcome will be, yes, I got a GED, so I'm a successful outcome. But the question, especially if you are going to decide whether to fund this program or not, one question is, what would have happened to that individual? What would have happened to me if I hadn't had that program to go to? And I put that in the last question. There is a term we use for that. It's called the counterfactual. And it's very important, because you can have a program that has a lot of outcomes, but actually has a question. What would have happened to those individuals if the program was not there? Would they have had the same outcomes or similar outcomes? In which case, we don't need to pay for that program. So the question there is, does it actually work? And if it does work, can it be replicated? And if it doesn't work, can we shut it down? Well, it's not that easy, that last one. If it doesn't work, can we shut it down? Because no matter what the evidence may show you, there's still a political process to make decisions. That's how we end up with things we do not need, like programs in the federal government that we may not need because we don't need the equipment that we're buying, but it actually helps employ people in a given state, so we keep them. Now I'm going to ask you, as I'm going through this, and I'm sorry to be dragging you through all this process, but there is a reason behind this madness. Let's become a participant, no matter what the program is. If you're interested in the program, you have to find out, how did you find out about the program? Who is letting you know? Is it being advertised through the media? Is it radio? Is it social networks? Is there a website? How do you find out that there is a program that I may be eligible, or I may be interested in? I don't know if I'm eligible, but if somebody's offering me a computer and trading me a computer so I can work from home while I no longer have employment, and I can then employ in a center, I may want to go do that. How do I find out about it? How much does it cost to invest into doing that outreach? Then I apply for the program. Are there any barriers? Do I have to apply in person? Do I need to read and write at a given level? Are the documents or the screens that I am looking at a reading level that are above 9th grade or above 3rd grade reading level? At what reading level do we create a program to make it accessible so we don't have a barrier? Then, am I eligible? Do I fall below some of that poverty thresholds, or am I eligible for a particular time? And how do I manage that? Where do I get all this information, especially if I am below the poverty threshold? How do I manage this? How do I get there? Do I have enough money to go on transportation to go and see somebody? Let's say I enroll in the program. What does it mean to enroll? Is there a particular dosage? Think of it like an antibiotic. We give you enough dosage to take care of the infection. So if I enroll in a program to learn how to use a computer, but I only attend once, I did not get enough dosage in order to be successful. So what does the program have to enable me to be successful and get enough dosage of that training so that I can do it? Let's say I complete the program. So now what's the outcome? You can have a very well-designed program. I complete all the training, and there aren't any jobs for me to go apply to. or the program itself does not have any way of saying, oh, here's the application, here are the employers. They just said, we will refer you to a different department where you can go and look for a job. At that point, your decision starts to getting easier whether you should fund this program or not. Somebody wasn't thinking broadly enough. I mentioned outcomes before, and I'm going to put two threads in there. Let's say in the program, when I go to enroll in it, the person I'm talking to likes me. You sound like you're a person that you have some entrepreneurial aptitude. I think you will be very successful. I'm going to let you join the program. That is called selection bias. Programs or individuals who are managing those programs start to choose the most motivated or the best prepared. Most people want to be successful. They want to have somebody who can, yes, let's work this, let's be successful. So one of the challenges is, what difference does the program make above and beyond what would have happened anyway? That's another one. That's what I referred to as the counterfactual before. And then I'm going to walk quickly because we're running out of time. I want to have a conversation. Assessing evidence, outcomes versus impacts. I'll give you an example. You have a very successful employment program that is placing 80% of the participants. And you have another one that is placing, let's say, 40% of the participants. And I will show you a slide later on about that. Which is more successful? If you're focused on outcomes, obviously the 80% is more successful. But if I tell you that the 40% one was placing people who had no high school educations, but the 80% one has only placing people with high school education, and that without that program, 70% of those would have been successful anyway in finding employment, then that's all difference. Then focusing on outcome no longer makes sense. I'll just move and I will show you the example I was talking about. This is a job, the blue will be a job program group. And the other one is a control group. And I'm going to pause for a second. In order to be able to determine which of these two programs are more effective, outcomes are not so important as what I called impact. And the impact is the difference between a control group and a program group or an experimental group. This is where one method, which is the most effective method to eliminate bias, to eliminate effects, it's called a randomized experiment or a randomized control trial. It takes individuals and randomly assigns them, one to a control group, one to an experimental group, and follows those individuals for several years. And if those individuals come from a comparable populations and they're randomly assigned, the difference in life experience, no matter how it happened, it takes place as a result of that intervention that took place. And that's what I call identifying and reliable counterfactuals. And I'm going to just skip that slide because I see the time is running. So evidence matters. And without evidence, you wouldn't be able to trust what I'm telling you about what program works and which program doesn't work. You would not be able to see those who are collaborators with you and say, trust this information. Because a lot of the information will be spent in debates, whether this should be done or not be done. It's different if everyone has information that they can trust and they can say, oh, we know that this program works. We're not debating that. We're only debating whether we should assign funding to that program because we have other different priorities. And that's a completely different debate to have than have and spend time and resources debating whether something works. I'm going to give you two examples. And I'm going to, one example is a career academy. Career academies were formed, this slide says 1969, but early in the 1970s. It was faced with a problem. People were students were dropping out of school. What if you could bring into a high school a set of initiatives that would bring employers to come into the high schools, make presentations of what it would be like to be working in the real world, and help those students prepare a resume, teach them how to interview. So what's originally in some locations conceived as a way to reduce high school dropouts became a way to interest students in, I want to graduate in order to be able to go and work. What is interesting is that this program was very successful. Some students that would have gone on to college decided to go, not to college, but go to work. And other students that would have dropped out decided to go to work. The principals of some of the high schools were not that interested over the years, as career academies have been going on for many, many decades, because it did not determine whether their compensation or tenure was in some way relieved, because they were being evaluated with high stakes test of whether the students have done that. But what it did show, even 20 years later, is that individuals who went through that career academies still earn more per year than those who did not. And this is a randomized controlled trial, which means the earnings are still significant. We followed up those earnings through surveys, and we're following them through something called administrative records. Administrative records means we are able to access not tax returns, but employment earnings, and they're able to determine how much they have earned. And when we compare those two groups, which were almost came from the same group, the population is similar, and they just simply split between a control and experimental group, and their life experiences would have been similar. There's still a difference decades later. That is a successful example of a social program. This one is called demonstrations, accelerated benefits, and don't try to read what is on the screen. The Social Security Administration asked a question, this is before the Affordable Care Act, and said, what if, when a person gets declared disabled by the Social Security, instead of waiting up to 29 months to get access to Medicare or to get access, what if that individual had immediate access to health care? Would they be able to come back to work sooner? Now, to do that demonstration, we had a control group and two experimental groups. One, the individuals got a health care plan. It was delivered by mail, and they could see what they could do. The other one had the same thing, but it had an advocate. Somebody would call them up, and now you have health care. Would you like to go and get a medical checkup? See what you are, let's see if we can help you get through and come back to work. And the reason is a demonstration and not an evaluation, because this program did not exist. The Social Security Administration did not want to create a program that was going to cost tens and tens of billions of dollars without having an idea, would this work? And that is where an evaluation firm comes in and says, yes, we can simulate it. We can see what it would work. In the end, the results were not positive. It did not mean that we were able to go and immediately come back to work sooner. So the Social Security Administration did not follow and did not say, well, this is not a good policy for us to follow. And I'm going to stop here. I'm sorry, I went fast, but I just wanted to frame something, give you a context for when to think about a social program. And I'll stop.
Thank you, Jesus. If anybody has any questions, you can type them into the chat or raise your hand, and we can you can ask them verbally. So, Jesus, could you give us an idea of the time that it usually takes to complete a trial? I mean, I know it depends on the endpoint, but how long does it usually take to assess whether an intervention has a positive effect?
Probably about 5 years, maybe longer. They're expensive, and that's why the government is primarily usually the only entity that can pay for the evaluation. We have to determine whether those effects go away. Are they sustainable? And there's always the counterfactual. What would have happened if you take a young person? A young person is going to mature. As they become more mature, they become more serious towards life. So is it worth it to invest in a program that has an intervention that is going to accelerate something only by 6 months, where somebody who did not have the program would have reached that level there? So it takes time. It's one of the criticisms about this type of evaluations. Why do we have to wait 3, 4, 5 years or more to find out whether there are any results? Can we get something quickly? And that's where organizations like MasterCard, for example, will have big data, will have a whole universe, and they can test if we send a letter to a particular zip code with a particular insert in a letter about a credit card, what is the effect there? Yeah, it works, so let's put it around and do it in other zip codes. That's a difference. But here, of course, any research we do, there are human subjects. We have an institutional review board. We have to protect the confidentiality of individuals. We have to make sure that anyone who's participated in the research knows that they're participating in the research, that they give us consent to be able to collect information, and that we follow up, and some things don't work, some things take time, some things have promising. Many of these programs have promising results immediately, but we know that something that happens very soon is not necessarily an indication that over time it's going to really work.
We have an interesting question. How much impact do your evaluations have on policy?
Well, the welfare reform that happened in the 1990s, 1996, was informed primarily by MDRC's research. So, and that's an example where the research had an impact on how influence policy. In many decisions, there is an example. I can give you an example of a large metropolitan area in the Northeast, whereas the mayor decided to. The mayor and a large foundation decided to carry out a study whether small schools made a difference instead of large schools. The research demonstrated that small schools were far more effective than larger schools. There was a higher graduation rate for most students. When a new mayor was elected, that a new mayor was elected with support of teachers union. And there was a push for larger schools. And there is a case where the evidence clearly suggests that going one way would be better, but the politics and determine the decision is eventually made in the other direction. That does not mean that the political decision was wrong. There's also a broader context. It just means that evidence is used probably for a few minutes to determine and inform what happens. And for large-scale decisions, it's always going to be a political process. And we cannot forecast that.
We have a question from Lorena. I am thinking about Connecticut Workforce Alliance that has programs that are not accessible to the population that they are meant to serve. A reason is because government had outsourced its accountability. How can this change?
I think the question has the answer. If you have a program that is not serving the population it was intended, if we go back to the thought experiment, or you're the decision maker, you said, well, why isn't? What went wrong? That's a part of program design. When we evaluate a program or an intervention, we try to make sure we're evaluating the program and, to the extent that is possible, control other factors. So one of the first things we do is we send a team that are experienced in program and say, is the program running well? There is no point in evaluating a program that is running poorly, because we're really not then evaluating the intervention. We're really only evaluating poor management versus good management. So we want to make sure that, to the extent that is possible, we evaluate the intervention itself. So we make sure that a program is running smoothly, that it has the capacity to deliver. And we also have qualitative evaluations. That means that somebody will know, well, these particular sites did not have the capacity to deliver their program. So we could not evaluate in those sites the intervention, but obviously we let others know. I mean, there is a serious problem where there is no capacity to carry out the program. So that's, again, that is a program on where resources allocated, it's management competent, but those are parts that go outside the aspect of a socialized or rather randomized experiment for a social program.
So do you monitor on a regular basis or on a randomized basis to make sure that that competent management is ongoing?
We have what are in our company, we have what we denominate research and operations staff. Operations staff are people who have, many of them, successfully run programs before, who are employees or collaborators, and they visit the sites. They collaborate with management. They make sure that everything is running smoothly, and that is part of the whole process during the evaluation period. We collect information. In order to carry an evaluation and management information system has to be in place. So it's both qualitative and quantitative. Is somebody coming to meeting? Is outreach taking place for individuals to come and have a second visit or a third visit if they have to? Is there follow-up in case it's a home visiting program? Is somebody visiting on the person? Or is there follow-up? Are things being done? So that is always part of it, and that's why this, again, takes a long time, and they're compared to other things that could happen in the social sector, they're expensive events.
So you touched on the pyramid early on, and Lorena has a question about that. How would immigration reform impact the U.S. economy? I remember when a fast food job was meant for teenagers in the 1980s, but now is an adult job. Do you have any research that bears on that?
No, we don't have any research on that. I mean, anecdotally, I mean, and immigration issues are impacting local economy. They may have times, as you say, where a fast food job was meant for teenagers in the summer, where you have other locations where there are jobs that nobody wants to do, but immigrants do. So it varies. So you will have a different degree of sentiment by locality. For example, some of the southwestern states cannot manage their economy without immigrants. Others in the different locations can. So it's the intensity of passion behind an issue as immigration is going to vary on the perception of how that is impacting.
So you mentioned before that that during the Obama administration, they started a more evidence-based approach to social programs. In your opinion, has this continued, and is it increasing? Are people on both sides of the aisle more or less interested in evidence-based policy than before?
There's always been an interest in evidence. Originally, the evidence for the evaluation of the big social programs was with bilateral support, I mean, or support from all parties. And to this day, there are pockets of individuals who are interested in the Congress and obviously the executive branch into support of evidence. During the Obama administration, there was a big surge about the evidence movement, so that a program would not be funded, or if in order to continue to be funded, there has to be evidence that it worked. Before then, I would say I could loosely characterize that evidence was of more interest in Republican administration than Democratic administration, but I'm making a generalization, and like any generalization, it's likely to be incorrect. But I think it's a fair characterization from a certain point of view of what the circumstances were.
So we hear all the time about polarization and people taking what are essentially moral stands on social questions, and that sort of flies in the face of the reliance on evidence. So, is there a difference between politicians' public stances and what goes on behind closed doors?
Because I work for a research organization that is nonpartisan, and it basically wants to remain nonpartisan, I would pass on answering that question. I I would assume there is a difference, but I am going to say just I assume it, and I will not elaborate on that.
Okay, that's
I
fair.
have to remain within the nonpartisan line.
So I take that as it's an interesting question, but not to be answered today.
Right.
Marianne asks a question: have you studied services first approaches like housing first and policies like universal basic income?
Universal basic income, we have not studied. We have done some work on it, but housing, yes, we have a housing practice with the Health and Urban Development Department. We have, if you're interested in that subject, and also a little bit on universal income, there are a lot of reports at MDRC.org. .org. The reports are free, downloadable. If you are having trouble sleeping during the pandemic, I highly recommend any of our reports. There are hundreds of pages long. The appendices are full of tables, and no matter how much difficulty you have sleeping, it's guaranteed to give you a sound sleep.
Great. Let's see. Are there any other questions? Would anybody like to unmute themselves and ask Jesus a direct question?
I have a question. Have you studied the effects of social programs in other countries?
In two countries. We had a program early on in the late 80s to transfer our technology. And by that I mean to enable another country to carry out what we did. And we created an organization called Social Research Development Corporation in Canada. And they carried out, it was created together with employees at MDRC, and it's an independent organization, and they carry out research and studies. We had a contract with the Office of the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom to carry out evaluations in the United Kingdom. They have a job centers, which was a program to enable people who were unemployed to find jobs. And later on, from the Office of the Prime Minister, we worked with the Department for Welfare and Pensions. So again, the aim was to transfer technology to be able to work with local partners so that they will be able to carry out these types of evaluations without having MDRC having to be involved.
So to follow up on that question, have you looked at any, for example, State Department or Department of Defense programs that are executed in overseas that have impact for either that locale or for American policy?
No, we do not work overseas, but we are familiar with some of the programs that the World Bank has. USAID as part of the Department of State, and for the Department of Defense, MDRC has only done one evaluation for the Department of Defense in its history. It's the National Guard program that I alluded to earlier, whether high school dropouts under age 18 could participate in a program called the National Guard Challenge, in which they were participants in a boot camp, basically a military boot camp, but during the afternoons and evenings they studied for their GED.
Okay, well, we're coming on the end of the hour, and I'd like to thank you so much, Jesus, for joining us today. We can only hope that MDRC has a lot more business in the future, and that our federal policy especially is based on evidence. And encourage everyone who's either interested or can't sleep to go to the MDRC.org website. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And if you're not on the Branford Forum circulation list, send me an email and I'll gladly put you on. So thank you everyone. Thank you especially Jesus. That was great.
Thank you.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye.